Technical Timeout, Episode 3.
And you can't be afraid, I think, as a coach to find out there's another way and there's an additional way to teach this.
Coming straight from Jump Volleyball Studios in the heart of Hamilton, Ontario, welcome to Technical Timeout, the podcast that digs into the habits of successful volleyball coaches. Now here's your host, Louis-Pierre Mainville.
Hey everyone, LP Mainville here. I'm your host, and I want to welcome you to this third episode of the launch of Technical Timeout, the podcast in which I try to find out what makes great volleyball coaches by interviewing them. What do you need to know about the show? Well, I will let you know with my radio voice. Technical Timeout is the official podcast of Jump Volleyball Training, a volleyball program based out of Hamilton, Ontario, whose goal is to empower young volleyball players and coaches so they unleash their full potential. Jump Volleyball Training offers clinics, private coaching, and summer camps where former professional players share their knowledge and experience. If you want to know how Jump Volleyball Training can help you and your team, go to jumpvolleyball.com. And if you go to jumpvolleyball.com/podcast, you will also find all the information about this show. How did I do? Not bad? Well, I'm sure there's room for improvement, but hey, I tried. So guys, another way you can help this show is actually to use our affiliate links. What are those? Well, they're the links to Amazon that we have on our website. So if you want to buy a book or, one of the books that we mentioned in this episode or anything else on Amazon, go through our link, the link on our website, and you know what that's going to do? Well, you won't pay more. Okay, so you'll pay the same price as if you just went on Amazon normally, but we will get a small cut, and that's going to help us run this show and keep it free for everyone. So this episode is part of our super week, or super launch week. And what does that mean? Well, it means that this episode is one of the 6 episodes I am releasing in the first week of the show being live on iTunes. After that, it will go down to 1 episode a week, and sometimes 2, when I have some special guests to bring to you guys. So in this launch period, you will hear interviews with amazing coaches. Glenn Hogue, Heather Brinkman, Brock Davidoff, Larry McKay, Brenda Willis, and today's guest, Tauri Caputo. Tauri is a very humble guy. Okay, so humble, he didn't believe me when I told him he would be a couple of episodes after Glenn Hogue's interview. Of course, Glenn has an impressive resume, but I'm just as impressed with Tauri's coaching journey. People have different ways to be great, and here's how Tauri is great. He has been coaching young athletes for more than 20 years. He actually started coaching volleyball when he was in high school and went on to become an assistant coach on the Brock University women's volleyball team for many years and the head coach of the Niagara Rapids girls 18U team. He is now the head coach of a 14U team, proving how versatile he is. What's awesome about Tauri is that he also coached martial arts for many years, so he's got the coaching thing down. And I think that's what's cool about this episode. It's not just about volleyball, but it's a lot about coaching in general. In the interview you will listen to, Tauri shares how making mistakes is part of being a coach. He also reveals his trick to jack his players' learning curve. You'll see it makes so much sense, and it is shocking coaches don't do it more often. So I hope you enjoyed this interview. And guys, here's Tauri Caputo. Tauri, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So Tauri, at Technical Timeout, we talk about coaching, we talk about athlete development, and just for the benefit of our listeners out there and all the coaches that are listening, I'd like to ask you to just tell us where you coach right now and how you're involved with youth volleyball at the moment.
At the moment, I'm coaching at the Hamilton Smash Volleyball Club, which is a newer club in the Hamilton, Ontario area. I just moved at the end of October, so I had to find a new place to coach, and they had an open spot for me, so I'm working with 14U girls for the first time. In the last few years, I was working at Brock University with the varsity women's team as an assistant, and then also as a head coach for an 18U girls team with the Niagara Rapids.
How was that? How was coming from coaching at a university level and going to coach some U14 girls?
It's been an eye-opener. It's quite the experience. So I was very lucky to start coaching again for the first time in probably over a decade at the university as an assistant with a very experienced coach, Dale Melnick, and learned quite a bit from her very, very quickly because, as you know, at the university level, we go 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week, multiple hours a day, sometimes 2 days. And I really haven't slowed down since leaving that program. But working with athletes that have spent 5 or 6 or sometimes 10 years playing club volleyball or really organized volleyball down to this group, which is their first year playing. We don't have a 13U team at Hamilton Smash yet. It's coming next year as we grow the club. So these girls are all their very, very first time playing in an organized OVA tournament. And it's been quite interesting working on, some grassroots technical development, what's a pass and where do you stand and how do you move your feet and then where do you put your hands and how do you talk to your teammates and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a challenge, but it's also been quite interesting and eye-opening getting to work with these brand new athletes for the very first time.
For sure. I can only imagine how challenging it must be to go from the university level to coaching U14 girls. And we're going to get into the technical stuff a little bit later. All those things that you just mentioned are super interesting, and I'm definitely going to want to dig into that. Now, that's where you coach. That's what your background is, and that's where you are at right now. But to have a better idea of who you are as a coach, I'd like to ask you why you coach, or what does it mean to you to coach?
Well, it's a good question. I get asked that by my parents, not my personal parents, but my kids' parents on the team all the time because I don't have any children of my own, and they're always interested in what I'm doing there. But I think it comes from my family background. I come from a family of teachers. Both my parents are teachers, and one of my brothers a teacher, and I was a lecturer and instructor at the university for the last 7 or 8 years, and so that sort of teaching background is really interesting to me. I find it very fulfilling, helping people to learn and seeing them develop. And from a coaching standpoint, my coaching probably started in the martial arts. Spent 20 plus years training in shotokan karate and had my own club at one point. And that's kind of where, sort of the love of coaching really started. Took a step back from that after going to school and starting my career and wanted something extra in my life. And this is sort of what's come to me in the last few years. And it's really become a passion. I probably spend as much time doing this as I do anything else in my life, including my work. So the part that I find the most rewarding, or that the reason that I'm coaching currently, is that I really like to see development, change, and people achieve their goals and be successful. And with this youngest group that I've been working with most recently, you see that sometimes every hour, let alone every practice or week to week or tournament to tournament. So there's a lot of gratification and reward in seeing people succeed and accomplish their goals. And that's primarily the reason why I'm coaching at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because that's also why I coach, and I know it's the reason why a lot of coaches coach, is to see those young players and those, they're teenagers and they're learning a new sport, they're passionate about the game, and you see the improvement in them, and you see it really fast, and that's very, very gratifying. Now, I have tons of questions for you. Before we start talking about how you actually do that, how you actually help your athletes achieve their goals, you mentioned you were a teacher. Are you still a teacher?
I'm not teaching at the moment, but I had been for 7 or 8 years.
And what did you teach exactly?
I was in the Faculty of Business at Brock University, so marketing courses and communications courses, strategy, that sort of thing.
All right, so nothing to do with sports, but
yeah, the thing I use probably the most is observation and feedback. So being able to see, all 12 athletes or 15 athletes at once, and very quickly seeing what they're having a difficulty with or struggling with, and being able to communicate with them quickly and effectively seems to be one of the skill sets that translates over from the classroom into the practice the most. Also working with young people, although they're not as young, the university level students, so 17 to 23, you just with them so much that you know what makes them tick, and have the ability to talk to them about pop culture or whatever's in the news and what's ever interesting to them. So, I'll use things like, don't be Miley Cyrus when they're passing the ball because they stuck their butt out. And, they think that's funny, and that they get it gets into their head really quickly, and seems to be pretty effective strategy.
Yeah. So you really relate to them. You try to find stuff that they will understand, because that's just their reality. Now, let's go back a little bit. Let's rewind in your coaching career, and let's just talk about when you first started coaching. I'd be interesting to know how you got into coaching volleyball, and also one challenge that you faced when you first started coaching.
So I probably started coaching a little bit of volleyball back in high school. I was a pretty good player. Didn't play any club volleyball. Didn't have the access to a club back in high school, but did manage to make a regional team back in 1994 summer games. So helped out with the junior team and with the girls program back in high school. That was kind of my starting in that space. But more recently, with this kind of more serious professional, direction, just the right place at the right time, and there was an opportunity with a coaching change at the university, and they needed some staff, and I happened to have a pretty flexible schedule, and thought, hey, I'd like to, try that out, and jumped in there. Challenges for me at the beginning, the challenge was always being afraid to make a mistake when trying to get across an idea or some kind of technical correction with the athletes, especially with these high-level athletes. That was the first sort of personal challenge. The second thing, and it was a comment after I finished coaching, or stopped coaching at Brock, that was made by the head coach, that basically said, being the head coach is easy. It's being the assistant coach that's difficult. And, I've tried to keep that with me when I'm working with assistants, or I am an assistant, making sure the lines of communication are open so that everybody knows what's going on, that your practices are, planned in advance, and you have the time to, explain to everybody what's going to happen so that the practice itself runs really smoothly.
Is that why being an assistant is more difficult than being the head coach, because of the assistant not knowing exactly what's going to happen? I'm really curious to hear about that, because it's the first time I hear that saying.
Yeah, that was for me part of the challenge. Not necessarily knowing what was coming next or what was expected. And as the head coach, you can change your mind. You can go in a different direction. You can stop a drill, start a drill whenever you want, and people just kind of go with it. The athletes go with it because you're the boss. As the assistant, you're always looking up to the head coach and trying to balance what their wishes are and what's actually happening, and it's pretty challenging. Right now, I'm working with a very young assistant coach who's interested in coaching. She's only 16, going on 17, and I'm trying to make sure she's in the loop as much as possible, and has a role to do, and that the athletes are paying attention to her and what she has to offer. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic and situation when you have more than one coach out there.
Because you've been there, so you know what it's like, so you can help your assistant coach.
It's also in this particular case with the club team, helped me be as open and forthcoming with the parents and with the athletes from a communication standpoint. And it takes quite a bit of time to explain to them what's happening and what's coming down the pipeline. But I think it's quite important so that they understand the reasoning for certain decisions, which is very different than the previous style of coaching and teaching that I did, especially in the martial arts, where you just do what I say and don't ask any questions. I'm not sure that style of coaching or teaching works anymore the way it might have worked a decade or two ago. Do as I say, not as I do was one of my sensei's very famous quotes that he used to say all the time. And I don't think that would fly with the young people today. If you're going to do something or say something, you better be able to back it up and follow it up with a good reason.
For sure, because they'll just go on Google or on YouTube and they will tell you that you were wrong.
Exactly.
So they'll find a resource that will say the opposite of what you just said. So
they'll do it immediately because they'll pull their phone out of their shorts and they'll be on Google in 30 seconds if you don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Now, there's two things like I want to dig in from what you just said. And I want to come back. Okay, so in a second, we're going to come back to what you said about the communication with the parents, because I think there's something very interesting there. But first, let's just rewind to when you said you were afraid of making mistakes. How did you deal with that? How did you overcome that challenge when you started coaching?
I've been watching a lot of video and buying and reading a lot of books. And over time, I've realized that maybe it's not as important to be technically perfect with every skill, although I like to be able to still perform all the skills. Because I didn't play at a very high level like yourself, I wasn't an international level player or a national, even provincial level player. I didn't have the benefit of working or being an athlete under some really high level coaches when I was younger, and so you don't have that experience to draw from. And I think that's probably something that a lot of, let's say, parents who get into coaching for the first time because their kid is starting to play a sport, and while you can watch it, it's very different to have done it yourself. So lots of books, lots of videos, lots of different sources. And more recently, I've been trying to get in touch with and visit multiple coaches' practices and see how they do things and why they do things. And I've been trying to focus on, really quick little corrections and statements about technique that make sense to both myself and also to the athletes about how to fix something very, very quickly. And it's amazing what, sort of pieces of language and communication coaches will develop over a 10, 20, 30-year career sometimes that are absolutely brilliant little quick ways to get you through some of those tough spots when you run into them. So talking to people and trying to figure out, what's the right way to do something. And the answer is always, it depends. And I really hate that answer as a person. I just like to have black and white answers to things. And they just don't exist out there, right? For every person that says, put your platform this way, somebody will say, no, put it the opposite way. And so that's led me to realize that, there isn't one right way to do anything, and it's okay to make a mistake. And if you find a better way to do it next week, you just introduce that way of doing it and say, here's an additional way, here's a different way, here's another way that I found that might work for you. And, see what works for the individual athletes and come up with a change or a modification that helps them improve that particular skill or that part of the game.
I think that's a great takeaway from that little tidbit of conversation we just had for all the coaches that are listening to this episode, is that, there is no right or perfect technique, and it is okay to make mistakes as a coach. Tauri, you ask your own athletes to make mistakes in order for them to learn. So it's just normal that you will make a couple of mistakes too while you coach. And I like what you said about just trying to do the best you can to help your athletes. And it doesn't mean that because you teach one technique a certain way right now, you will be teaching it the same way next year. And I can actually say that you tell the truth when you say that you go through other coaches to learn, because I've actually seen you in one of my practices, and that's actually how we met. I was really surprised to see you because I'm not used to see other coaches coming into my in my clinics and my practices. But I think you had a few athletes participating in the clinic.
Yeah, we had I think four or five of the girls. I very much told them, listen, you need to go to every opportunity that's available to you. I didn't have those opportunities. I lived in the middle of nowhere. And when you have some, ex-athletes and coaches at the caliber that you and the jump volleyball people are, and they're coming to your hometown, regardless of the cost and the time, you need to go when you see it. And the questions were, well, what if they teach us a different way, or they say that your way is the wrong way? I said, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to go and I'm going to find out and learn some new stuff myself. And you can't be afraid, I think, as a coach to find out there's another way and there's an additional way to teach this. And maybe you are wrong, or you're outdated, or whatever. It's perfectly fine. I think too many people, there shouldn't be any secrets in coaching. I don't think, not at the developmental level anyways, maybe at the international level when there's money on the line or whatnot. But when we're trying to develop, volleyball as a sport at the grassroots level in our country or in our province, the more you talk to people, the more experience and wisdom you can get out of them. It doesn't matter if the other club is down the street and you're competing for athletes and tryouts or whatever it happens to be. You need to have a camaraderie and a friendship and a relationship that allows you to, run scrimmages together or combine your practices or whatever it happens to be to learn, the most you can, and then deliver it in the best way that you know how.
Yeah, well, Tauri, I hope that you realize that I'm going to be using a lot of your quotes in the future, because I like everything you say, and I think that's so important for coaches to share at the youth level. And that's one of the reasons why I started doing clinics and I started working with athletes from all different clubs, because I felt that, a lot of coaches were they were protective. They were trying to protect their athletes in some way, or protect their knowledge. They either don't want to share it, or they do not want their athletes to be exposed to other coaching. But I think that what you said is so true. If you want your athletes to learn, they need to be exposed to different kinds of coaching, and it's just going to be very helpful for them. Now, you mentioned you were reading some books. Is there a particular book or a couple of particular books that you read that you would recommend to our listeners?
I have pretty much every volleyball coaching book known to man. I bought them all. They're just to have them, and I used to look at them a lot more than I do now, especially with this particular group. They're developmental athletes, and you don't need to do anything too crazy and tricky. But I thought about a book that I listen to all the time, which has to do with skill development in general. It's called The Talent Code, and it's written by Daniel Coyle. And it speaks to the mechanism by which the human body acquires skill and develops skill, and talks about skill hotbeds in the world, a lot of which are sports oriented, like the Russians and tennis at some point, and Brazilians and soccer, football, and music, and how young people or humans in general develop skill, and what are those mechanisms. So they talk about this neurotransmitter, myelin. They talk about chunking, like we learn language, and breaking down skills into chunks, and how that would work, and what kind of interesting things you can do with skill development in that way. So it's a book I would highly recommend to any coach out there, teachers also. The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle.
Definitely a great book for all the coaches out there. If you haven't read it, recommend you reading it. You can go on our website at technicaltimeout.com. Just look for Tauri's episode, and you will find a link to that book in the show notes. Thanks for sharing that resource with us. That's great. Now, let's go back a bit to what you said about communication with parents. I definitely want to dig a little bit into that, because I also think that
Well, it's a pretty interesting thing. I've yet to speak to a coach that at the club level, rep level, and even at university that doesn't have some issues with parents or guardians or whatever. And sometimes it has to do with playing time. Sometimes it has to do with practices or attitude or whatever. And it's always an issue. So my approach has been to be as transparent and as open and as willing to give as much time as possible to clarify and ensure everybody, athletes and parents, know exactly what's going on. So, with this particular group, I'm using email for the most part. to communicate. I have all of the parents' emails and all of the athletes, if they happen to have their own email, on there, and I send them all the same information. I don't hold anything back. It lets everybody know where they stand and where they are, and more than happy to speak to anybody at any time about any issue that they would have. Sometimes I disagree with their direction, sometimes they disagree with mine, but at least everybody is in the know. And I think when you start hiding or not telling people what's going on or where they stand, that's when problems start to develop. So I've had very few problems this season, and very few problems last season as well. And the only time they came up is when people weren't willing to express their opinions or tell people what was going on. So,
okay. And do you share with the parents like what you do in practice? Do you talk skills with the parents?
My practices are always open. I have parents that attend every single second of every single practice for the entire year. I don't see any reason to close the door. I know there are a lot of coaches out there that have closed practices. I don't want to have that outside influence or whatever. I think, in the tournament situation, in a competition situation, there's going to be external influence out there anyways. The athletes need to learn to pay attention and focus on the task at hand. So my practices are totally open. My practice plans are there. If they want to take a look at what we're doing today, if they have a question about anything, I'm always there half an hour or more before practice starts and after practice is over. That approach, kind of, nothing to hide. This is what we're doing. Come on in, take a look. Let me know what you think is the approach that I'm using, and I think it's been fairly effective thus far.
I have no doubt it is an effective approach, because if you want your kid to have success in whatever they do, you need to support them in some way. And I think that the communication you have with the parents of your athletes is going to empower them, or, make it easier for them to support their kids through volleyball. Because let's be honest, like, volleyball is not one of the most, well-known sport. So sometimes parents, they sign up their kids into volleyball and they don't even know what the rules are. So if you go out there and speak to the parents and let them know what's going on, they might be in a better position to help their kids, and your players are going to be learning and improving a bit faster too. So
yeah, we've been doing a few things. We've also done a couple of team bonding events and invited the parents to play. We've got one coming up. We're doing some beach volleyball for the first time, because I'm developing a new program for this summer, and the parents and the siblings, everybody's invited to come and try it out, and they get to see how difficult the sport actually is when they get the chance to try it. So they're not just screaming at their kid when they make a mistake, because they've made that same mistake, and they're like, wow, it's more difficult than I thought it was. It's a late developmental sport and highly, highly technical. And I agree with you. It's pretty important for the parents to be supportive, especially at a younger age, because without the parents, you're not going to get anywhere.
I like the idea of getting the parents to come and try volleyball, and then them realizing how tough it is. I think that's a great idea. Should try that on my own.
I'm looking forward to them trying to play beach volleyball for the first time and moving in the sand. It's gonna be really interesting.
With the sun and the wind, like that's definitely going to be something fun to watch. You just mentioned how technical the sport of volleyball is. And this podcast is called Technical Timeout because we also want to be digging a little bit into the technical side of volleyball. I want to move on now to what makes you a special coach. I'd like to know what you think your strength as a coach is. Like, what's the skill you're the best at teaching?
That's a good question. I'm a small guy. I'm only 5'9", and so I was a setter back in the day. As a smaller player, I had to sort of learn how to move really quickly. Serving was a really important part of my game, and obviously volleying and setting the ball, but running an offense and controlling the game. So I'm probably a better player now than I ever was when I was younger, because as I've developed in this coaching direction, I've had to be able to teach and explain all of the skills from a technical perspective to 13-year-olds or 12-year-olds actually this year, all the way up to 25-year-olds, and figure out ways to make their ability to perform the skill incrementally better. So I'm a pretty resourceful person in the sense that I try to find out multiple ways to solve the problem and then introduce them in a way that the athlete can understand, but also integrate into their repertoire step by step. So breaking down skills, and probably now what I think I'm the best at is developing a practice where I go through an acquisition, stabilization, integration sort of progress, and without them even knowing, they go from not knowing what the skill is at all to actually being able to implement it as part of gameplay. And it's something I spend a lot of time on developing when I'm putting a practice plan together. And I find it's very gratifying to see the development in one practice, and for the athlete to get the opportunity as a coach to point out, oh, remember when we were doing that 20 minutes ago? That's when you could have used it in the game. So let's try it again. And they see the results very quickly, and then they adapt and adopt those changes. So that's sort of the direction I've been working on recently.
Do you have an example of that process where you say that your athlete is going through different stages in the practice and they don't really realize that they're learning the skill that you're teaching them?
Yeah, well, we were working on net play after our last tournament. The girls and the younger players have a difficulty when there's an overpass or on the other side or on your side of the court, and what to do exactly at the net. They're turning around, they're trying to block the ball or hit the ball out of the air, and the setters in particular. So we were working on dumping the ball, different ways to dump the ball or poke the ball over or punch the ball, because I've got athletes that are under 5 feet tall and the net's very, very high, and when they get close to the net, they get stuck. So we did some individual sort of training where I was just tossing the ball really close to the net and having them try different techniques to get the ball over. And then we went into a little bit of a 3-on-3 gameplay where the net was broken into actually 3 parts. So I actually had 3 games going at the same time just to try to control control the flow of the game. And one of them was at the net, and I was entering the ball as an overpass sort of situation where both of them were kind of fighting at the net for the ball. And then we went, eventually into a full-on game. And there was at least a half a dozen situations where there was an overpass or something, and they would try it and it would fail, or they would try it and would be successful. And there was great opportunities to say, see, that was the one that worked, right? Or they would use, their right hand instead of their left hand. And you can immediately just look at them and show them the left hand versus the right hand. And they go, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to do it this way. So, really quite simple, but just focusing on that one skill throughout the entire practice. And not forgetting that what we had done earlier on seems to be pretty effective, especially with these, very early developmental players that I'm working with this year. And they've come an incredibly long way technically.
I think what you said is very interesting, and it's kind of something that I try to do myself. And it is to, throughout the practice, introduce a skill without the athletes knowing exactly what this is going to be for. I think that it will help a lot of coaches out there that maybe have less experience than you. All those coaches that sometimes are in a practice and they wonder how to teach a certain skill. Well, now coaches, that if you just find maybe a few games, if you find a few drills that are going to be fun for your athletes to do, that will require them to use the same kind of movements that you will be asking them to do when you teach them the actual skill, they are probably very likely to learn that skill and to be able to apply it later in the game situation when you're going to ask them. So great tip there.
I think just as a follow-up, my goal when I'm especially introducing a brand new skill is have the athlete recognize when they perform the skill and when they perform the skill correctly. So what I'm looking for them to do is look at me and say, I did it, or did you see that? Because then it reduces the amount of time I have to tell them, hey, you should have done it this way, or that was an opportunity to do it. When they do it for themselves for the first time and they recognize that they did it. We had a couple situations this year where an athlete made a serve for the first time in a game overhand successfully. And that was a bigger moment than winning the match, especially for that athlete. They still remember that. They know exactly what the score was at that time. So you introduce a new skill, they perform the skill correctly, in a game later on in the practice the next day, and then they say, "Do you see? I did it. I got it. I figured it out." And that to me is I put the check mark there, saying, "Okay, now they're paying attention. They know, that that's something that they've accomplished. They didn't know how to do the day before or 5 minutes ago." And then I've got, that's the progress I'm looking for. It's all about progress for me and learning.
It's about being better than you were yesterday, not necessarily about being good. And when you see your athlete making that serve overhand for the first time in a game, you are happy because you've been working hard to teach that athlete how to serve overhand. So it's gratifying for you. And for your athlete, it's like, oh, wait, like I can actually do this and I'm able to learn a new skill and to use it in a game. So now I can learn any other skill. So I think it's very good too for their self-confidence. So Tauri, now I think it's time to get into the rapid fire question round. So let's get into it. All right, here we are in the rapid fire question round. So Tauri, if you could go back in time to the moment you started coaching, what advice would you give yourself?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes and have fun.
All right, straight to the point. I like it. Name one habit of yours that you think is related to your success as a coach.
Planning.
Planning. Another one, maybe? Planning. All right. Well, coaches, you heard it. Plan your practices. You talked about a quote earlier from one of your former coach, I think. But is there a quote in particular that you like and that is related to coaching?
I have a couple. Coaching is the universal language of change and learning. That speaks to me quite a bit. A great quote, a business quote from Bob Nardelli, from the CEO of Home Depot, is that I absolutely believe that people, unless coached, never reach their maximum capabilities. That speaks to how important it is to coach. And then just one for the coaches out there, you can tell your athletes this: if at first you don't succeed, try doing what your coach told you the first time.
That's a good one. That's a great one. I'm not sure the athletes are going to like hearing that one, but it's a good one for coaches to use. So guys, those quotes will be in Tauri's show notes. So if it went a bit fast and you want to make sure that you didn't miss those quotes, you can go to technicaltimeout.com, find Tauri's episode, and you will have the quotes that he mentioned right there in the show notes. Now, Tauri, is there like a tool that you use either in practice or in planning your practices and that you would recommend for coaches out there?
Absolutely. My mini iPad. It's the most valuable tool I have because I can take video and show them immediately what they're doing well, what they're not doing, and show them, what they're actually doing versus what they think they're doing. So I have that thing with me almost all the time. It fits right into the pocket of my hoodie, and I pull it out and I take video, little quick 5-second, 10-second shots all the time, and show the athletes what they're doing. I think it's absolutely indispensable. And if you don't have an iPad, you can use your phone. Everybody's got a camera on them, but I don't think a lot of people use them as much as they could.
Last question before we go. Are there words or is there a particular phrase that you use over and over again in your practices?
Yeah, at the moment I'm using whose ball, asking the question instead of saying call the ball. I'm saying whose ball, so that they are thinking, is it mine? And
I really like whose ball because instead of just saying, okay, call your ball, you're asking them a question by saying like whose ball, so they actually need to think about it and figure out, oh, wait, is it my ball or is it not my ball? And then make the decision like, okay, do I need to go play the ball or do I need to do something else? So I like how you turn that cue into a question. Now, I'm going to let you go, Tauri. It was super valuable, all the things that you shared with us today. I want to thank you for taking the time to talking with me and to sharing your experience with other coaches. Now, is there a place or is there a way that we can either connect with you or learn more about you?
There's only one of me out there. I've got a fairly unique name. So I'm on Twitter, Tauri Caputo on Twitter, LinkedIn.
Well, guys, if you have questions for Tauri, I'm sure you can tweet him, and I'm sure it's going to be a pleasure for him to answer your questions and to connect with you. Tauri, thanks again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Guys, that's it for our technical timeout. Let's hear the whistle and game on. Guys, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Tauri. Told you this guy was inspiring. So now, if you made it that far, it's because I didn't put you asleep with my voice, so it must have been somewhat interesting. So if you have time to rate and review the show in iTunes or in Stitcher, it would be great if you did. It would help get this show to the earbuds of more coaches. So don't forget to check out the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in this episode. We are on social media, I just want to remind you, so you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/jumpvball, and on Twitter @LPMainville. That's just my personal handle. No Twitter account for Technical Timeout yet. So yeah, that's it. Congrats on making it to the end of this third episode. It shows you want to learn and improve. Now let's get more coaches on the show, more people to listen to it, and